Good morning, everybody. Good morning. I hope that you're having a great week. We just started, but I hope that it's going to be a great end of the month and that the business is going well for you, and even more important, that you are all safe, and also your family and loved one. So today we got another very interesting webinar, and today we will talk about the document design in BarTender. How easy is to create new document, different type of document in BarTender using our advanced features in BarTender like intelligent templates, conditional printing, and many others that my colleague Ian Cumming will show you today. Today, the webinar could be a few minutes, well, PowerPoint, just a few slides, but it would be very practical, so it would be hands-on. And by the way, my name is David Paras. I'm the sales director for the ones that don't know me, and it's a pleasure for me to be here in front of all of you. And now I hands over to my colleague Ian, which is the star for today. All yours,
Thanks,
Ian.
David. Thanks, David. First off, can you guys see my screen okay? I'm not sure if that's showing right now. So you
Ian,
should see a
confirm. I can see your screen.
Okay, so you got the BarTender logo there. Great. Well, first thing I'll do is I'm a bit shy, so I'm going to turn off my webcam if you don't mind. Okay, so BarTender. So today we're looking at document design in the BarTender software. So we're going to have a deep dive into the document design using the BarTender 2021 software. In case I haven't already mentioned, my name is Ian Cummings, and I'm the Senior Sales Engineer here for Siegel Scientific in EMEA, so that's Europe, Middle East, and Africa. On the agenda today, we're looking at first this PowerPoint presentation. As David mentioned, it's going to be relatively short, just covering a few concepts on the document design process, and also looking at document management, which is related to document design in that it's a way of storing and controlling the document design process. But then we're going to be mostly hands-on with the BarTender Designer software itself, taking in a tour of the application, the various parts of the UI, the tools, toolbars, toolboxes, and all the rest of it. Looking at document layout, the different types of design objects that you can create, also the data sources that go into those objects, connecting to databases and data files, making use of forms, so BarTender forms for data entry, along with the form controls, the actions that you can execute to really augment and add to the functionality of what BarTender can do, and also show as part of the intelligent templates our conditional printing capability, so that it makes a document very dynamic in terms of what gets printed at print time. We'll look at some example documents and then touch on some of the document management functions. So as we're designing a label, how that document file can be stored in the system database and manage it using the librarian application to really manage the process of your document design workflow. Okay, so first on, we look at document design. So first off, the BarTender Designer itself, essentially it's a powerful yet easy to use document layout tool. We work very hard to make sure that it is simple, straightforward, and direct and easy to use as possible in order to create dynamic and data-rich labels typically labels, though of course a designer can create a document for all different types of media. It doesn't have to be self-adhesive labels. It could be tags, it could be standard Office A4 sheet documentation, it could be cards and whatever else. So in terms of the BarTender Designer, this is really the central application of the BarTender software suite, which is used for creating and designing your barcode and RFID documents. Of course, with the option of adding data entry forms for manual workflow printing. It's a fully WYSIWYG, meaning what you see is what you get application, and is also supporting Unicode, which means the languages that can be used within the document can be for all languages of the world. BarTender uses Windows printer drivers, so any printer that has a Windows printer driver can be printed to using BarTender. And of course, as you probably know, we also make Windows drivers for industrial barcode printers. When you create a document, you save that document to a .btw file. So that's the file extension of a BarTender document. And this is a proprietary binary document file, which unfortunately cannot be exported for use elsewhere. And likewise, we cannot import documents from other platforms. The BarTender documents themselves are both forwards and backwards compatible, broadly speaking, with other versions of the BarTender software. And we work very hard to make sure we maintain that compatibility between versions. Of course, if you're using a new feature in a more recent version of BarTender, then if you try to save that document in an old version of the BarTender software, then of course you'll lose some of that functionality of that new feature. The BarTender Designer can be set up to share resources between different team members. So if the BarTender Designer is being used as part of a design team, then those resources can be shared between the team members to help ensure that there's a consistent design of the documents, that particularly for compliance labeling, all is of the same formatting. And when it comes to printing, yes, you can print directly within the BarTender Designer software, but also a document can be published or made available to other applications in the BarTender suite. And of course, as you'll see in a future webinar, can be used as part of an automated process. So let's take a look at the user interface of the BarTender Designer. And for this, I'm going to use the magnification tool of PowerPoint to help highlight the different aspects of the application window. So first off, we can see the application window toolbar, and in that it will typically have the name of the current document. If it hasn't been saved, it will by default give it document 1 as the file name. And you'll notice there's an asterisk next to the file name. That indicates that the current file has been edited and has not been saved. Of course, as with other Windows applications, we have application menus. So all the usual sort of menus are listed: file, edit, view, create, etc. We'll be taking a look at those a bit later. The BarTender Designer itself, as we can see, with more than one tab here, allows you to create more than one document at the same time, and the user will switch between the tabs in order to switch between document designs, document design files that they wish to edit. So many documents can be used or edited at the same time. Toolbars. We have various toolbars for performing actions such as to open or print or preview a document. Various items there for creating design objects in the label area, to change the view, and of course to change, in terms of text, the font and styling and formatting of that text, and colors and the weight of different line objects, for example. Toolbar here on the right are the alignment toolbars. So as you select typically more than one object, you can align those objects to each other in all the usual ways. Here at the bottom, we can change the zoom magnification of the view of the document we're currently looking at. And of course, importantly, we have the document design area itself, which is the part in white, and the background or the work table, which is the part in blue. It should be noted that when you're designing your label, any content that is placed on the white part of the label will be printed. Anything that hangs over into the blue or is fully into the blue will not be printed. You can put content there for reference purposes, particularly if you are sharing data values between objects, etc. But if it is placed there, it will not print. Coming here to the left-hand side, like with the document itself, where you can switch between documents, we also have tabs here at the bottom to switch between templates and forms. And remember, a form is an optional form. Not all documents need to have a form. It's there if you wish to print labels as part of a manual workflow process for printing, manual data entry of variable data before then going to print. And you'll notice that there's a tab here for creating a new template and also a new form, because each BarTender document can have more than one of each. If the document is connected to a data file or database, we have a record navigation toolbar here that allows you to step through the records to actively connect or disconnect from that data in order to represent or hide that live data in the actual document design itself. Status bar. This gives information about the currently selected printer, the dimensions of the current document, and also if you have an object selected, the particular object will also be listed there in the status bar. So it gives status and information about current items. And here we see the toolbox. The toolbox is a very useful item, and we can switch between looking at data sources like we see here. So the various data sources which can be dragged and dropped onto the document design. And we can also switch between view for components, which we'll be looking at later, and also layers, which are different edit spaces or discrete edit spaces for the document design. And we'll be looking at why that would be important to use. And lastly, I think we have the measurement rulers. So depending on the the view options and the type of measurement that you're using, your measurement units, you'll see the ruler on the side, X and Y, allowing you to place your content on the label. Okay, so that's the user interface of the BarTender Designer. And of course, we'll be seeing more of that as we go hands-on. Okay, so what is this? This is what I like to call the BarTender document file model. So what is the structure of a BarTender document? So when you save a BarTender document file, a BTW file, it contains all of these objects. So within the BarTender document file, you can have more than one template. Most document designs have just the one template, but you can have documents with more than one template. Likewise, for layers, you can have a single layer in your document design for your one template, or you can have multiple layers. If you have more than one template, each template can have its own set of layers. And then inside the layers, which is the discrete edit space, you have your design objects. So this is the text, the barcodes, the pictures, the drawing items that you place in your document design. And if we're looking at the various objects, we can have native text, word processor, markup container, symbols, barcodes, RFID, picture objects, lines, drawings, grids, and tables. So a wide range of different object types that can be added. And each of those objects have their own set of data sources. So more than one data source can be used per object. Likewise, you can put in validations for those data sources. You can enable scripts using VB-script currently for those objects. And as you'll see with both templates and layers and objects, each of these have their own set of conditions that allow you to conditionally choose what is printed at time of print, and of course, the various object properties that allow you to define the various aspects of it. At the document level, though, we also have these additional properties. The page setup to set up media dimensions, document options for various miscellaneous items that you can set about the document. Document events, so the events are when printing, we have various events that can occur in which we can choose to do things. Document metadata, this is where we set data about the document to describe what that document is. And this is very useful when searching for a document in a printing application, for example, such as the print portal. Document level scripts. So if you have programmatic scripts that you wish to run at the document level, then you have that object there as well. And this is often used for dynamically changing the document as it is at time of print to add an extra dimension of dynamicness to your label design. We can also run document level actions. So again, this is tied to the document events. So when a particular event occurs, such as when starting or ending of print, when selecting a new record for printing, you can perform various actions. You can set up a document level password to encrypt the document, to secure the document, to prevent outside use. An embedded revision log. So if you wish to have traceability over your document design as you're creating it, so it has a trace or an audit log of each change and modification and addition to the document design, then that will be recorded in the revision log. Also, in terms of data, we have a document level database connection, a connection to a phrase library for language translations, a connection to global data fields if you're using, I think, the enterprise edition of BarTender, and I'll demonstrate what that is a bit later, and also embedded data tables. So tables of data that are embedded in the document file itself. And last, of course, data entry forms. So you can have more than one form in which you have your form controls. You can have form actions and form events. These can be events and actions that are tied to the form itself, or a form command button control, which when clicked will perform different actions. And of course, a set of form properties which can be modified. I mentioned the document options, so these are various miscellaneous options that can be defined for the document to store metadata, to define what it is, identify the document. You can set comments, which are acting as instructions for other users. You can set your preview thumbnail, so how the document looks when being searched or browsed. Defining your measurement and view options, enabling VB scripts, performing or setting up document level actions, and setting any print languages for your phrase libraries. Printer setup is important. It's an important first step when creating a BarTender document. So where possible, select the printer driver of the target printer on which it is to be printed. So first off, choosing the printer before you start designing the document. By default, take advantage of, so this is by default, you can take advantage of the printer drivers or the printer's capabilities. And this therefore gives you the best print performance. So when you're designing your document, you're designing your document with performance in mind. And certainly if there is a Siegel Scientific printer driver available for that printer, then we strongly suggest that you use that printer driver, as it allows you to take full advantage of the printer for high performance printing. Also, set your printing preferences for how the document is to print. So choosing, for example, if you're using a thermal printer, the type of label sensing that you wish to use. If you're using thermal transfer or direct thermal, the speed at which the printer is to print, etc. Now, it should be noted that although we recommend you doing this, it is not mandatory. It is simply helpful to do this printer setup before you begin designing your document. There are also various layout tools in the BarTender Designer application that's orientated to allowing you to rapidly design a document and making the whole process much more easier to do. So the various toolbars that allow you to create various objects, the fact that you can click and type directly onto the document design, that anything you see in the toolbox, for example, can be dragged and dropped into the document design to add content. Of course, there are various keyboard shortcut combinations, which I'll try and step you through. And in the data sources section, you can drag and drop the standard data sources onto your label, but also various data instances. And I'll show you what I mean by that a bit later. The components, BarTender components section of the toolbox is, in my view, very important as it allows you to create an object or a fragment set of objects just the once, save that as a component, and then reuse as many times as you wish. And this really does cut down on the amount of time it takes, typically when you're designing documents that have a lot of similarity. There's a lot of things the same, a lot of content that is the same between the documents. And also the document layers, which again we'll come on to, which allows you to have separation in your document design, which makes handling a complex label design much easier to create. So recommended approaches to design. So we recommend the following rules. So first off, structure the design with a proper use of templates, layers, and grids if necessary, so that it's not just easy long-term to design, but also for yourself as the designer, but also for other people in your team, particularly if you then move on to another job, so that other people in the team can easily understand and make changes or modify or maintain the document going on into the future. One of the questions that we see is, particularly if in the past a customer has hundreds of document designs, perhaps they were using a software that is not as dynamic and powerful as BarTender, or perhaps they just decided to create a document design for every label that looked somewhat different, even if some of those label designs were for the same business requirement, but were for different products, let's say, or there was some change or difference between each of the variations. The recommendation I have is that you design a document for a business requirement and you make use of BarTender's powerful intelligent templates and dynamic printing and layout capability so that it is able to handle the variations in that business requirement without the need for having separate document files. This allows you to have a much more manageable number of documents to create. And of course, over the long term, that makes things much more maintainable. Also, we would strongly suggest that where possible, make use of document management. Now, yes, this does require the Enterprise Edition, making use of the librarian software, but certainly in the enterprise environment of larger businesses, having traceability control over the document design process long term very much pays dividends. And certainly if the customer is working in a regulated industry, this often becomes quite mandatory, a requirement. It should also be noted there is always more than one way to get the same result. So BarTender allows you to create BarTender documents and to create that document in various different ways. It doesn't always have to be the same way. And if one approach isn't quite working for some reason, there is often other approaches that can be taken. So briefly, just one slide here on document management. As mentioned, this is an enterprise edition feature, making use of the librarian application and functionality. It allows you to manage your documents using the librarian application to define custom workflows for the process through which the document has to follow. You can set up rules to automate the process of which workflow will apply to which files. And of course, it's the system database of BarTender in which those documents are stored. So rather than being stored in the file system directly, it's stored in a SQL server of the system database. With BarTender 2021, we can integrate that functionality with the Print Portal web application. And the Print Portal web application, as well as being used for printing documents, can also be used for performing various document management tasks. When combined with integrated security, allows you to safely publish managed documents for printing production, and it allows you to better handle change requests as that document is in production and then needs to be changed. So that can be done without production being stopped. Okay, so enough of the talk with the PowerPoint. Let's go to the BarTender software itself. That was a seamless transition. Okay, so here we see the BarTender designer. If I go Help About, I can see BarTender 2021. Currently R5 is the installed software. As we saw in the slide, we have the application window with the menus and toolbars. If I select New from the menu, I could also choose it from the toolbar. In my case, it opens up a new document. It could also be the case that in user preferences, we may want to run the wizard. Oops, it's around here somewhere. So startup, the new document wizard, this one here. But I prefer to go straight to a new document. Now, as was mentioned before, with a new page, the first thing we should do is select printer. So go to the print menu, and from there choose the printer that we wish to use. And on my PC, I have a number of printers from different manufacturers available to me. Once I select that, if you click on the Document Properties button, from here we can change the printing preferences of my document. Under the About tab, we can see that this is a printer driver from Siegel Scientific. So from here, I can choose how I wish to print the label. If I'm using a label sensor, for example, all of that good stuff. So this is very much dependent on the particular printer and printer driver you have selected. Now you'll notice in the BarTender printer drivers, there is an option for page setup. However, BarTender itself has a very extensive page setup dialog. So we very strongly suggest that you perform page setup there instead. And indeed, you can access page setup either from the toolbar or from the menu, like so. So let's go to page setup. So from the page setup, you can see we have multiple tabs available to us. Let's take a look at those. So from the stock tab, this is where we have various predefined media from various media manufacturers. So if you see a media manufacturer from one of the companies that you're dealing with, or yourself as the case may be, then you can select a particular stock size based on its part number. Alternatively, you can from scratch create a user-defined size. And as we currently have selected a thermal transfer printer, we first, for the width of the page, set the width. Let me just remove that error. And this width, when I click into it, you see the dimension of the width, and this is referring to the web width, so the backing liner of the label stock. And then the height is the height of an individual label. Let's go for 120. We can set the orientation, portrait, landscape, portrait 180 and landscape 180. You'll notice when you select the orientation, in the little preview here, we can see what the orientation of the page will be as it comes out of the printer. So here with standard portrait, we can see the labels will come right way up as the user sees it facing the printer. Whereas landscape, the idea with landscape is in the BarTender designer, you design your label design the right way up. So you don't have to crook your neck, to turn your neck to, or turn your head to view your document design at an angle. Instead, you design your document the right way up, but then when printing, it effectively, in landscape, for example, it prints the left-hand edge of your label design as being the leading edge that comes out of the printer first. So this is what we mean by landscape. We can also enable effects such as mirror image, if you're printing on a clear label, for example, or negative to reverse the print. And also we have some template design options. So if you're printing to a duplex printer, we can have a separate template design for the front and back of the template. So two different designs, one for the front face and one for the back face of the label or page, as the case may be. And we also have the ability to enable a page template. Perhaps this is more understandable if you're printing to an A4 sheet. Let's say your individual label layout has multiple labels on that A4 sheet, like so, but the page template will be the full A4 sheet itself. So it allows you to have two levels of template printing on the same page. The page template for the entire sheet, and also a template for the individual labels themselves, if that makes sense. You'll see on the layout, we can specify multiple rows and columns. For a thermal transfer printer, it's typically just one row, because when you press the feed button on a thermal transfer printer, just one row of labels comes out of the printer. But of course, you can have multiple columns, depending on the label stock you're using. If there's a gap between that, you can set that manually. So let's say there's 3 millimeters between the labels, like so. But let's just go for one column. For thermal transfer printers, typically I leave the top and bottom margin at 0 because the printer will index to the leading edge of the label using its sensors, so there's no need to put in a margin. And left and right, well, typically that's a couple of millimeters either side for the gutter of your label stock. So that's the removed label media either side of your die cut label. We can change the shape of our template. Typically it's rectangular with rounded corners, but you can choose different options there if you wish. Even elliptical with a hole in the middle if you so want. This is typically just visual on the screen as opposed to having any particular effect on the printing. If the printer supports various features, we can do things such as pause, cutting, cut and pause. So your printer supports a cutter. You can choose to enable that action and specify the occurrence of when the cutter will execute. Just use the standard settings for now. Printing order, this is more applicable if you have a sheet of labels and you want to specify the order on which those labels will be printed. Perhaps if I just create a new label and the printer I'll choose, so that was a Control P, let's go for PDF. Adjust my page size. One of the questions was, do we support A5? And the answer is yes. When you choose a standard office printer, you'll notice that you suddenly have access to the standard Windows page sizes. With printers such as thermal transfer printers, these are called narrow web printers, and they don't really support standard Windows page sizes. So those are hidden when such a printer is selected. So on the layout, if I specify multiple labels like so on my page, oops, have a margin. So the margins are more applicable to page printers. The printing order, this is where you can specify in what order the labels will print. Particularly important if you're printing serialized labels, for example. Under templates, I think this is one question that was asked earlier. By default, you have the one template. So if I just quickly drag and drop some content there, I'll just select a Windows font. You'll notice that by default, it used a printer font. So that's by default choosing to design and therefore print your labels with performance in mind. With that content on there, you'll see that my template is in fact a label layout. This is what we call a template. But we can in fact have more than one template. So template 1 and template 2. And here we see these templates are in the primary templates group, that we can have a start of print job, a start of group such as a record, for example, or a record of data, end of group, and end of job. So for example, if I create an additional template for end of job, and I'll rename this end of print, like so. You can choose whether this is to print or not, like so. And you notice at the bottom of the UI, we now have 3 separate tabs tabs for each of the templates. So for the end of print, well, I'll select the direct data edit tool and say end of print job here. And select my selector like so, choose a different font. Let's go for Arial Black. Different size, make it nice and big. Now you see at the present time, we just have a single line of text, but I also have options for different text formatting. So for example, if I select the center formatting, this effectively changes the text object into a paragraph text object. So I created this text object by simply dragging and dropping content from the data sources toolbox onto the label like so. And you'll notice it remembers the font styling from the previous from the previous object. If I was to change this to something else and then drag and drop, you'll notice it's now changed likewise. So it allows for a very smooth flow of the document design process, which I think is nice. I can also create such text objects from the toolbar here. So when I choose the option for creating a text object, I can see the various object types. So the normal text, normal wrapped is a paragraph text object as opposed to a single line. We also have a word processor object if you wish to do additional formatting, like you've seen a word processor for a text object. Although it must be noted that using the word processor object is very graphical based, so you won't be able to use device fonts, for example, and it will be slower and less performant when printing. And also we can insert symbol characters. So if I choose one of those, as part of the BarTender installation, we offer various symbol fonts for various different industries. And I can scroll through those. So we have various chemical warning sign symbols, electrical symbols, so for electrical products, various facility emergency type signage symbols, symbols for the GHS pictograms for chemical warning system, various hazard symbols, as you see there, certification logos, symbols that are used in medical device products. So we have various symbols there that are used by that particular industry for that particular type of document design. Packaging. So there are some packaging symbols there, as you can see. I think I got some of the older symbols in my installed Windows as well as the newer ones. So recycling, risk phrases, etc., and textile. So various symbols from various different industries. And I can select one of those, hit insert, place that on your document design. Now, as this is a text object, of course, it's a Windows font, so it's fully scalable, like so, without losing any quality. Also, it can be incorporated into various other text objects and formatted in various different ways. On this template too, I could, for example, place a barcode. So from the toolbar, I can select one of my recently used barcodes, or I can select the More Barcodes option, which takes me to the full Select Barcode dialog, where I can find the barcode I want under various groups such as General Purpose, disk, GS1, either by application or by symbology, like so. So here's the data barcodes. Healthcare barcodes, either HIBC or ISBT formatted healthcare. Pharmaceutical barcodes, postal and shipping barcodes, TLC. I'm sure that's not tender loving care. I'm sure it means something else, but the meaning of which escapes me right now. And of course, we have a list of all symbologies for all barcodes supported currently by BarTender. And as you see, currently there's 105 different barcodes to choose from. So very comprehensive. So let's choose a random one, code 16K, for example. When I place a barcode on the label, I can, of course, change its size. You'll see there's this yellow tab here. I can click and drag on that to change the placement of the human readable, should I wish to. So with the BarTender Designer, we're trying to be very interactive, very clicky and draggable, rather than forcing the user to open the properties of the individual object and modify those settings to change how it looks. So it's much easier to do that in an interactive fashion rather than interacting with a rather boring properties dialog box. Boring by comparison, should I say. Let's say, for example, if I accidentally scroll off the label, you'll notice that when you do that, in the ruler bar here, the measurement ruler bar, it will show a button saying Find Template. Click on that and it takes you back to your template. Likewise, if you accidentally scroll halfway off your document design, you can use this item here, Fit Template to Screen, which takes you back very nicely. We can, of course, zoom in like so, or zoom in on a particular part of the label design. Once you've zoomed in and you've made your changes that you want to the object or the design that you're working on, bang, zoom back out again, like so. You'll notice also in the toolbar that currently I have the snap to object or ruler. So as you're moving, let's create another item. And here what I'm doing is I'm holding down the control key, clicking and dragging. And this allows me to create multiple copies of that same object. Let's multi-select those by clicking and dragging a box. Align that to left. Let's demonstrate that a bit, shall we? Control A to select all. Okay, so align left, and maybe I'll distribute and space evenly between them. So nice use of the alignment tools there. Of course, I can rotate should I wish to. I can also use this rotation handle here to rotate the content, like so. And the alignment. So with the alignment, you'll notice that as I'm moving this text object, because this ruler here is enabled, it highlights when I'm in alignment with other content. If I turn that off, like I've done now, it does not do that. So this allows you to very easily align content with each other, either to other content or to the edges of the document itself. So you see that yellow highlighting, which is very useful. It allows you to easily create content on your label design that is aligned nicely, for want of a better word. Let's select a text object there, and well, you've seen that I can change the font based on the fonts that are available in your particular Windows PC. So we're taking advantage of the fonts that are installed on Windows, and also the fonts that are made visible by the currently selected printer driver. So you'll see that there's a difference with the device fonts. So you've got a little printer icon there, as opposed to the Windows fonts. So this O symbol here is for an open font. That's a Windows font, type of Windows font. Of course, we can also change the size, either point size directly, but we can also stretch the text in whichever way and whichever fashion we want in accordance to our requirements. We can change the style in the usual ways. We can subscript or superscript it if we so wish. And also we can change the color. So with the color, we have this nice new color selector in BarTender 2021 that allows us to easily select the color that we wish. And you'll notice, well, let's expand this out for the full set. So we can use standard colors using either the RGB or the HSL model. We have a nice color picker. So if you want to choose a color based on something that you pick, I know this blue here, then you can do so like that, which is nice. And we can also set the color by data source. So rather than setting the color based on what you choose in the dialog, you can set it by the data source. So if I say color red, for example, or green, then it dynamically changes the color of that object based on either the name of the color or the RGB value, for example. And of course, as this is now a data source, you could connect that up to a data entry form so that at time of print, you can choose what color some of your content is printed in. So obviously useful if you're using a color printer. Now this is a multi-template label design. So 2 templates plus the end templates. Let's see what that looks like when I do a print preview. In the print preview, let's show multiple labels across. So you'll notice that it prints template 1, template 2, and the end of job. Now, of course, if I choose, let's say, 2 copies and preview that, let's see what that results in. This results in template 1, template 2, template 1, and template 2. So 2 copies of the templates in series. And for the end of print job, that template is used there. The end of print job template is very useful for customers when they're doing long production runs and they want some visual marker for the production operators to see where a particular print job ends, so that they can chop those labels up. So print job 1 and print job 2 are physically separated from each other, so that they don't accidentally put the wrong labels on the wrong product. So templates are very useful, and as we come on to later, we can make the printing of these templates conditional. Last, for page setup, we can set up a background. So with a background, we can place an image, a color, or what we call a template image. Let's choose the template on which that template image is to be found. Select a file, and choose one of my template images. Let's look at the thumbnails to see which one it is. And the idea with a template image is we wish to create a document. Let's choose this one here. And maybe in the image processing, just make it a little bit more transparent, like so. And the idea is that when you're designing your document, you have a guide. So template 1, you have a guide as to where the content is. So let's say I have to recreate this particular document. Rather than looking at a specification sheet to the side, or maybe a PDF in a different window, the actual document design that you have to create is already there in front of you as a faint background image. So this allows us to put content. If I click once in there, I can then edit that content. So SSCC. Obviously the font is a little bit too big, so let's squidge that down. Like so. I can grab the drawing tool and draw my line across. Again, you'll notice the alignment tool helps me there. I drew that line a bit too high, but with that object selected, I can use the cursor keys on my keyboard. If I choose the selector tool, the cursor keys on my keyboard to nudge the object into place, which is quite useful. So for the company name, I'm just going to type in Siegel Scientific and choose black so we can actually see it, like so. Now, of course, the template image is there as a guide. It doesn't have to necessarily be used as an exact thing that you have to match. It's there as a guide to help you through the document design process. Let's add a barcode. Now, in this case, it is a GS1 barcode. So I can select either GS1 128, which happens to be in my recently used list, or I could have gone to the full dialog. So here it places the barcode there. Let's switch back to Arial, shall we? 8 point. Place that to size, stretch it out, and you'll notice that as I stretch the barcode or reduce the width of it, it does so in steps. And this is because BarTender is being very strict and making sure that we comply with the specifications of the barcode symbology and also the GS1 standard. And that means there's certain limitations that are placed on the barcode in terms of its width based on the resolution, the printhead resolution of the printer currently selected. This is because we scale this down, compress the barcode to its most dense, then what you're having is the thinnest, the narrowest element of that barcode is being represented by one dot of the printhead. And on a 300 dpi printer, that's 12 dots per millimeter, so that's a 12th of a millimeter is being represented there for the narrowest bar. If I scale it up by one, that narrowest bar is now being represented by 2 dots from the printhead, and all the other bars of a wider thickness have to be scaled in the same ratio. And this is why, based on the resolution of the printer, as you scale the barcode, it does so in jumps, as opposed to if you had a picture or an image where you can scale it very smoothly. This ensures that the barcode is readable and of a high verification standard or grade. Very important for compliance labeling. If I open the properties of the barcode, importantly, under the symbology and size, we have some of the symbology specific settings of that barcode. Current symbology selected, of course, is the GS1 128, which is in fact a code 128 barcode symbology, which has GS1 formatting. As part of the GS1 standard, we have a GS1 application identifier wizard. And this will step the user through the process of creating a GS1 compliant barcode. So let's choose next. And as part of this process, it steps you through selecting your application identifier. So for example, the GTIN, which is the globally traded item number, which identifies the product. Choose the source from which the GTIN is coming from. Typically, this will come from a database or data file field. But for this demo, I'll just choose embedded data, so static data. Type in a value. You can type in your number here, and you'll notice that it automatically enforces data verification. So no more than 13 numeric digits can be added. If I try to enter in some alpha characters, it also prevents that as well. So it ensures that the barcode symbology and standard is properly adhered to. You'll also see that we can add additional application identifiers. So yes, I'll choose to append another. So select my next one, maybe choose a best before date, like so. Actually, I'll choose a serial number. The reason that I'll choose a batch code. The reason I'm choosing a batch code is that a batch code is a variable length application identifier. So I want to show you how that variable length field is terminated. So again, I'll choose some embedded data. Put in some data like so. Just something random. And now select, yes, I want one more. And for this, I'll choose a production date, or best before. And you'll notice the best before is using the format year, year, month, month, day, day. Next, next. Data source. By default, because this is a best before, it's suggesting use the system clock. I can, of course, use embedded data or from a database field, etc. But yes, okay, on this occasion, I'll use the system clock. No, I don't want to add any more. So we finish. You'll notice, and we'll come to data sources in just a moment, the wizard automatically generates multiple data sources for this one object. So each with the application identifier first, followed by the field. Application identifier, followed by the field. Now, if you remember, the batch code is variable length. So therefore, the wizard automatically inserted a data terminator, which terminates the field, telling BarTender that the next data is actually an application identifier, which is for the best before date. And you'll notice for the best before date, we have the option of using the printer's clock if the printer that you're currently selected does in fact support a real-time clock in the device itself. Under print clock options, we can do error handling so that if the real-time clock is not found or there's something wrong, that it will choose to use the Windows clock instead or something else. Now we can see the barcode is far too wide. So how do we fix that? Of course, we can manually scrunch it down like so it fits nicely onto the document design. But one thing I like to do is the following. So under symbology and size, for the X dimension, you'll see there's a little property button. Click on that, and it allows us, let's have it in millimeters, please. It allows us to automatically fit the barcode in a specified dimension. So for example, the maximum dimension could be, let's say, 90 millimeters, based on the fact that, our maximum X dimension, sorry, the maximum barcode width as a whole could be 90 millimeters. I beg your pardon. As the label is, what is it, 101.4 millimeters wide, therefore 90 gives you a nice quiet zone either side of the barcode. Now what this means, nothing seems to have changed. Another thing I do is with the position of the barcode, I position it central to the template, like so. So you'll notice that the position item is dead center of the barcode, positioning central to the actual label itself. So therefore, if I come to, let's choose the batch number, and I add some additional content there, you'll notice that it automatically scaled the barcode. So it chose a higher density, but keeping it nicely placed within the confines of the actual document itself. So it's a nice thing to do. Therefore, if you have variable content for your barcodes, it ensures that the barcode remains on the label as expected. So I could go through the label design, creating more of that if I wish. Okay. Let's create a new document and go through some of the different types of data source. Perhaps this is easier to do when, let's choose a Windows font, when dragging and dropping from the toolbox. So first, embedded data. This is where you have fixed text. Now this could be for a text object, could be for a barcode, etc. So what you write is essentially what it is. Date and time are related. It's basically using the clock. Drag and drop that on. If you drag and drop that from the toolbox, you'll notice that it brings up the data type from where you can then specify the formatting and the locale of your data item. So as this is a clock, it allows you to format that object accordingly. So now you'll notice that the data source type is a clock. Data type is selected as so, and transforms, which we'll come on to in just a short while. Perhaps related to, well, actually, we'll come back to that in a minute. Let's just add another text object and change the type of data source by clicking on the properties button there. So currently the type is embedded data, so it gives me options for selecting other types of data sources. So we've looked at clock already, coming from the Windows or the printer clock. If I'm connected to a database or data file, I can select a particular data field to use. If I've set up a phrase library or library phrase for language translations, then I could use that as my data type to source from that phrase library. A global data field is, I believe, an enterprise edition feature where you can set up essentially a variable field of a particular name of a particular value that is stored in the BarTender system database. The purpose of this is that it can be shared between multiple documents and indeed multiple users without potential problem of a conflict or a duplication of data. For example, if it's a serial number. So global data fields are very good for universal values that you may wish to use in your documents between users. An object value is sharing a value from one object and using it in a different object or data source. So that can be quite useful. A print job field, this essentially is placing metadata onto your label design. I'll show you that in just a moment. An external file is essentially using a text file as a total data source. So if you have a text file with a block of text, such as terms and conditions for a label that you're wishing to print, then it will take that block of text directly from that text file and have that as the data source. Visual Basic Script. This is where you can programmatically have a single line, a multiple line, or event-based multi-line scripts for generating essentially a value in a programmatic form. Kind of the Swiss Army knife of data sources. And lastly, the printer code template field. This is where you're wishing to use BarTender as a design tool. So you create your BarTender document, you specify printer code template fields, which is highlighting the variable data items of that design, and then you export that document as a printer code template. And essentially this is a file in native print language of your target printer, and where you have your printer code template fields, this is where you're marking up your variable data items. So a wide selection of data types there. So let's use some more of those. So a print job field, for example. If I expand the list here, you can see the list of print job fields that are available. So for example, if I want to show the version or edition of BarTender that's currently in use, I can do so. Actually, one thing I can do there is, as I've had a field placed into a text object, you can see that it's a print job field, and I can switch between different fields if I wish. Well, I can click into this and enter some text in there as well, and place additional content very quickly and very easily. So this is just print job field information, so it's basically metadata information about the document. So perhaps if you wanted to have the current page number, you could also have that as on there as well. So page number 1 of, and then the total number of pages, or printed items as the case may be, like so. So quite often you'll see, particularly on, I guess, packing labels, logistics labels, if you're printing a set of labels for X number of boxes, you want to say this is label 1 of 5, for example. Making use of the print job fields for that use case is very handy. Also mentioned the global data fields. These are the fields that are stored in the BarTender system database, and I can right click on that and manage my global data fields. And currently, I can import or export them between systems if I wish. But also we can see that I currently have one data field, which is called serial number. I can give it a description if I wish. Let's call it my universal serial number, like so. Or I can use a standard term if I prefer. And then of course it has a value. So it's essentially a variable, a name and a value. I can specify a data type if I need to, whether it's text, date, time, currency, number, etc. I'll just use text for this. And I can also set transforms. And a transform is a series of rules that you can use to validate or modify the data that is to be used. So here we can see that the serialization rule has been enabled. If I click on the Properties button for that, I can see the serialization settings that have been made. So incrementing, decrementing, numeric in this case, incrementing by 1 each time, by whatever interval, etc., etc. I can also choose to reset at a particular value, or after each job, or based on the calendar, or whatever definition that I wish to use. And these serialization options are the same for global data fields, but also for normal standard serial numbers that you may add to the content of your document design. So with this global serial number, which is stored in the BarTender system database, sure, I can just drag and drop that into the label design. Let's just click into it, give it a little prefix. Univer, come on, computer. Say SN, like so. Now, if I double click on this, we can see that is adding that prefix manually by inserting it directly in the label design has resulted in 2 separate data sources. So the embedded data of that prefix that I created, and then separately the data source for that global data field. So this keeps those data sources separate, and each data source has its own set of data type that can be specified, and also its own set of transforms. So you'll notice here that the transforms for the embedded text data is very different from the transforms available for the global data field. So not all field types have the same set of transforms available to them. If I select an external file, let's drag and drop that onto the label. Currently it is empty, but if I open that up, you'll see that it's wanting me to specify a file for where the text content is to come from. Click on the select file. Hopefully I have a spare text file somewhere. So this allergens text file, like so. And it's just taking the straight content of that text file and setting it to be the value of the data source, like so. So it's a quick and easy way of adding text content into your document design without needing to connect to a database or data file for record-based data. Lastly, just before we go on to connecting to database and data file, let's take a look at a Visual Basic Script item. As before, I can just simply drag and drop it from the toolbox. I love that toolbox, it's very handy. And this takes us to the script editor. So it's an editor where you can programmatically define the data value. And you'll notice that it's possible to have a VB script for each of the objects. Under the transforms, there's a possibility for a VB script. Obviously for text object 8, because its main data source is a VB script, we can actually define that directly as the direct data source. There are also VB scripts available at the document level. So as defined here with a lightning bolt, these are events. So as the document is performing different events, and we can also attach actions to these events, we can also run VB scripting. And this allows us to dynamically change the document design, the document layout at time of print for a very dynamic document. Anyhow, let's go to the VB script here. And, well, very simply, I can join two text strings together, like so. So let's join those two strings of data together. If I open up the properties of that text object, you'll see that it's currently a single line expression. So it's implicit that the value that you set here is setting the value of the data source. If instead you're using a multiple line or event controlled VB script, then to set the data source, you have to have the value equals expression. So somewhere in your multi-line script, you have to have value equals, and that then sets the data source of what it will be. Of course, VB scripting is a very complex and in-depth topic, so we'll leave that for another day. Let's create a new document. And what we will do here is connect to a database or data file. So we can do this by starting the database connection wizard by clicking on the icon there. And you'll notice that we have the option of reusing a shared or named database connection or to create a new one from scratch. Now, those named database connections are coming from the administration console. So in the administration console, if I go to the database connections option or section, you'll see that we have these two named databases, and I can add additional named databases. And this will take me also through the database connection wizard, and it allows me to have another named database. Now, why would I do this? Well, if I create one from scratch, then this data connection is set up just for this particular document design. And if I need to change that database connection at some point in the future, then I would need to edit each of my documents in which I have specified this data connection, where I'm pulling data at time of print in order to get variable records of information for the labels I'm printing. Not too much of a problem if you only have a few document designs that use that data connection. But if you, or your customer has many document designs that use a database connection, changing that at some point in the future becomes a bit of a pain. And therefore, using a named database connection allows you in one central spot, one central place, to modify that data connection should you need to. So if you move this database file to a different location, you only need to modify it here just the once, and all of your document designs that use that named database connection will automatically be updated. Okay, so let's connect to an Access database. Choose my database file. Select my database table and then finish. And this takes us to the database setup dialog. You'll notice the name of our connection is here. And if I wish to, I can add this as a new named database connection. So I'll call this webinar, for example. Add this as a new named connection. I'll call it webinar here as well. Okay. And switch back here. Maybe I need to just refresh it. There we go. So we have a new named database connection. Very nice. In a database connection itself, in addition to its name, which is important in some aspects, particularly when you're automating your printing, we can access the tree of properties to our database connection. You'll notice that we can specify a custom SQL statement if we wish. We can look at the tables that are currently used, and of course we can connect to multiple tables and views in our connection. We can look at the fields, the name, the data type, and if you wish to set an alias. So for example, this particular field represents the company name. So if I wish, I can set an alias for this so that in BarTender, it's referenced as company name rather than comp, which doesn't really mean much to a human being. Of course, we can specify a sort order to sort the records into a particular order that you may wish. So I can choose the company name, for example, A through to Z. We can set a filter. So a filter is where we search or query the records for a particular matching value, and I'll come on to this bit later. Options, depending on the database that we're connected to. And we can also set the number of records per item. So typically most labels are designed with just one record per one label that's printed, but you can, if you wish, have multiple records being represented on a single label. So for example, a pick list. You may have a label where you have to print multiple items in your pick list for a warehouse application. You may want to specify that there are 10 records of data that could be on this pick list as a maximum. And this therefore allows you to, in your label design, place items for record 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 in your label design. And of course, we can browse the data. In this particular example is a company name and address database. Click on OK, and immediately you'll see in the data sources section of the toolbox our various database fields. So for example, just as before, lovely drag and drop is available to me. So I just create that as a paragraph text object and combine that with some text input like so. And you'll notice that I really can drag and drop these items to a particular cursor position in my label design, or in the one object, should I say. So address line 1 and 2, city, comma, space, and then zip code. So very quickly and easily, we can have a multiple data source text object be created for a series of drag and drop operations. Now quite often on, well, let's say we want to highlight the company name. So we just highlight that particular field, and let's say a slightly larger font, like so. Now, often it's the case that a text object needs to be in a certain space. So let's put a box here. Of course, drag this across and change the width, but of course we can see that the text is too big. This is where we can enable the auto fit option. So with the auto fit option enabled, I simply scale the text object to fit within the confines of the box, like so. And indeed, if I open up the properties of that and choose the auto fit option, we can see what options are available for how we scale the text. Now, I like to set a maximum of 100. So when I create the text object to begin, I choose the nominal font size and then set the maximum to be 100%. It will scale up to the nominal font size, but where necessary, it will scale down the point size, but we can also scale the elongation of the individual characters, also character spacing, and also line spacing if we so wish, like so. As was seen in the user interface slide of the presentation, we can then use the record navigator toolbar here at the bottom to step through the various records. So therefore the text fits within the confines of the box, not too big, not too small. Now, some of these text objects you'll see, or some of these records, they don't have a value for address line 2, and this results in a gap in our address. Not a problem, we can account for this. Essentially, here's address line 2, the data source, address line 2. Let's move this over here. And there's a carriage return data source as a separate data source that follows it. And what we need to do is to suppress this carriage return if address line 2 is empty. So first we select that carriage return data source and come over to the Transforms tab, which you remember allows us to do validations and data manipulations. And one of the transforms is suppression. Click on the Properties button for that, and we can choose the option for how we wish, or under what condition we wish to suppress the data source. So in this case, we can say when the previous data source is empty, so previous one in the list, then I wish to suppress this carriage return. Bang. Job done. So now we see the addresses are correctly presented to the user. Components. Let's say I've created this nice handy dandy component of an address, and I want to reuse it in other documents and maybe share that with other users. For this, I can make use of our components, which is found in the components section of the toolbox. I'll multi-select the objects that I wish to create a component of, right-click and choose Create Component. I'll call this address, like so. And in the typical draggy droppy fashion, I can drag and drop that onto my label design. Now, of course, I can create a new document and draggy droppy onto the label design. But because this is using database fields, I would first need to connect to that same database. So I choose the webinar database, select my table, finish, done. Where did the company name go? there's always something. It's because of the alias. I was hoisted by my own petard. Trying to be too clever, that's what happens to you. Okay, so components are great for creating content and making it reusable. And I say that you can share that between other team members, and we can do this by going to the administration console, selecting file locations, and you'll notice along with the various other resources for BarTender, we can set the location for our BarTender components. And this is essentially a folder with a set of component files in which BarTender will have access to those components. So you would set this up on the first machine, and you could then back up those locations, which will save it to an XML file, XML configuration file, and then at a second and third and fourth PC, you can restore those file locations so that you're sharing components folder, same set. I didn't mean to close that. The same set or library of components can be shared between multiple users if they're stored on a network folder, for example. It's also handy for being able to drag and drop other content, particularly if you're a partner wanting to demo label design. I can select some content here, maybe enable the text wrapping feature so that as I move that text object around other content, it automatically wraps that content around, just like a standard word processor, which is nice. Let's also drop a picture onto my label, like so. I guess the picture object is one item I haven't covered yet, so let's take a look at that now. In terms of the picture object, we can take a picture from file, embedding it into the document, or from a device, again embedding into the document. We can link to a picture, so where it's stored in some other folder, in a database field, or in a data source. And we can also capture a picture at print time. So if you're using a data entry form and you want to have a webcam to take a photo of someone to print on a business card, you can do that. Connect to a blob field in a database. And also encoded picture data is where we're using base64 encoded pictures. So I think I have an example of that. A base64 encoded picture is, actually I bet I don't have an example of that. Dang it. Not handy. A base64 encoded picture is a picture that is used for web type applications. So if a web application wants to share some data with BarTender and that data is picture data, it can encode that picture data using base64 encoding, which is human recognizable characters and therefore web friendly. Now at the moment we have this big text object which is overlapping this other object, which when I'm trying to then select something, it may be difficult to select this one or that one. To solve this problem of a complex label design, we can make use of layers. And with layers, what I like to do is have more than one layer, as this allows us to have a better structure to my document design. So I can take this object here, for example, and I can arrange it to move it to a layer 2. So now you can see layer 2 contains the block of text, and layer 1 contains the address. And you can turn the visibility of layer 1 and 2 off and on, or lock it as the case may be. And we can also drag and drop to change the ordering of the layer. And you'll notice that with the block of text that is wrapping, depending on it changes the Z ordering of the content in each layer. And therefore, for the wrapping of text, it changes whether it wraps or not, like so. If I was to select that layer and draw a block and put a color inside it, like so. At the moment, it's on top. Now it's underneath. Of course, let's get rid of the purple block. Of course, we can change the name of the layer. So block of text, for example, to make it more understandable. Likewise to this. And also, we can open up the properties of this for conditional printing. So by default, it's always printing, but I can change that to be either always, never, or based on a condition. So for example, if address line 2 is empty, then print. That makes sense. So we can see what that looks like if we do a preview. So on that case, there is an address line 2, and in this case, there isn't. So, or there is. So you can see how we can dynamically change document design based on a condition. Now, perhaps a better way of doing this is to do something I haven't covered yet, which is named data sources. It's like with connecting to a database or a data file, named data sources are also very important. Essentially, it's very similar to the global data fields in that if I create a new one, it allows me to have a named variable. So let's call this option. And for its value, I'll choose embedded data. I'll say true. And I can drag and drop that, and you can see its value is true, which is what we've done. So very similar to a global data field, except that a named data source is specific to the actual document itself. It's not shared between documents or users as such. It's a variable that's of the scope of the BarTender document. I could also, let's open up the text object here. I could go to a data source that is already created, and you'll see under the data source section, whether this is a data source of any type, I can specify a name. So for example, I can call this company name. So this is separate from the field name. The company name makes it a named data source. And when it's a named data source, it allows you to reuse that same value elsewhere on the label. It could be the case that I have that in a barcode, like so. I'm running out of space. So again, as I go through the records, you can see it's sharing the same value. It's not working as a barcode there, is it? Also, if I was using a script, for example, a Visual Basic script, I can make reference to that named data source. Well, I can make reference to the database fields. So I can make reference to that. But also in my VB scripting, I can also make reference to the named data source. So it's making that value public, which is or can be very useful. In the context of a layer, as we see, the block of text is conditional. I'll change the property of my condition so that if option equals true, then I print the content of this layer. So at the moment, it's two text objects now. It's the block of text plus the company name as well. Now, at time of print, I could be setting that named data source in a variety of different ways, from a database field, but also I could be making use of a data entry form. So the data entry form is the optional part of a BarTender document in which you can have, at time of print, the user enter in additional variable data entry content. So from the toolbar here, we can see a variety of different data entry form controls are available for selection. And perhaps for my option named data source, I'll choose the radio button. And I'll link this to my named data source called option. So this form control is now bound to that named data source. So the value I enter in here sets the value of that named data source, or alternatively, other items on the document design. For my list items, I need to set some values, and they will be true or false in this example. And I can say how I want to arrange. Let's make it horizontal, shall we? Like so. Now, as I'm connecting to a database, I could also have a form control here to allow me to pick the records that I wish to print at time of print, using the record picker form control like so. And this record picker, well, there are many property items that we can adjust for how the record picker is presented to the user, how it's configured, what options are available, if it's multi-column or single column, or using custom cards. So this form control can be presented in quite a variety of different ways. But essentially, it's allowing the user at time of print to conveniently select the records that they wish to print. Okay, Let's take a look at what this results in. So if we were to preview, the user is presented with their records. Let's say do a search on the word Intel, and this returns 2 records which have the string Intel in them. Maybe I don't want this one, I want just that one, and I'm going to say false for the block of text, and therefore we don't see the block of text. But alternatively, if I was to do a preview again, this time I'll say true and type in the word tech. Gives me a couple of texts here, and preview that instead. And now we can see dynamically we have the block of text from that particular layer intelligently selected at time of print using conditional printing. In terms of these records, when you're connecting to a record-based data source, you can print variable information on your labels in accordance to how many records you have and the quantity of records to print per label or per item. So if you have 10 labels to print and you have 10 records of data, 1 record per label, then you can do that in a single print job. If instead you wish to try to do the same using named data sources, well, named data source can only be set once at the beginning of the print job. Therefore, to get the same result, you would need to have 10 separate print jobs, 1 for each label, where you specify the new value for each named data source at the start of the print job. So for example, if you're using a data entry form, you would print 1 label at a time, setting the named data sources via the data entry form for each single label print job, as opposed to connecting to a data file or database that allows you to select those records in one go and print them as an entire batch. So it's good to have that in mind. Now, what we have here, we've created a document, but let's say I wanted to save that document. Well, I can do so by clicking the Save button, and I can save that to the Windows file system, or alternatively, I can save that to Librarian if I wish to make use of BarTender's document management functionality. So here, really we have a virtualized file system because of course we're storing to the BarTender system database. So I can give this a name, example, label. And when I hit save, it's going to prompt me to enter in a comment. So this is my initial commit. Because this is a file management system, it asks you to comment to put instructions and information with each particular process that you do. So every time you make a change and save that to Librarian, it asks you to make a comment for traceability purposes. And you'll notice that by default, it has a transition here called design. So I check that in, and you'll notice that by default, it is now locked the document. I have permission to unlock the document, but essentially this design is now stored in the Librarian software. If I switch to the librarian application window, navigate to that same folder, we can indeed see our example label is now stored in the document repository. Now I just need to open up Administration Console again because I closed it earlier. So here we have the file. We can see that it's revision 1. It's using the approval workflow, and its current state is in design. And here we see the file history. So for example, if I come back to BarTender, unlock it and make a change. So let's just change the font size, for example. Move this over here or over there and save it again. Yes, check it in. I made a change. Check in. Come over to Librarian and may need to just quickly refresh. We can now see we have a second revision, still of a design state, still using the approval workflow. If I decide that revision 2 was a mistake, I can roll back to revision 1, which in turn gives us revision 3. Maybe I decide that revision 3 is ready to go to production, so I ask to transition it to submit it for review. So is this ready for production? So you can see how it's very much controlling the document design process. You have different revisions, so if you do make a mistake, not to worry, you can go back to a previous revision. So it's much more safer that way. Also, if you're operating within a team, you have different people with different responsibilities, some to design, some to check for quality of that design, and administrative purposes, for example. So I've submitted it for review. So it's now of the state review, where depending on your workflow, it could be the case that other people have received an email notification asking them to check your document and to either approve it or reject that document file state. So where is it getting these workflows and file states from? Well, if I switch back to Administration Console, which is controlling the overall miscellaneous configurations and settings of BarTender, we have Librarian Setup. And from here, we can define our workflows, our workflow rules, and if we wish to integrate it and connect it to our print portal web application, from which some librarian tasks can be executed without the need to install BarTender. If I look at the workflow rule itself, edit the workflow, because I have one created already. This opens the workflow designer, which is like a flow diagram design tool. So you can move things around, you can select them and view the properties of that particular workflow. So it's proper diagram software here. You'll notice that when the file is added, it goes into design, and we can change the name of that workflow if we wish. It's not a production ready document, but it is an initial file state. I can set permissions as to who has access to change to and from that state. And I can also set up email notifications, which indeed is what I've done for the review file state. So it sent out email notifications to, well, to these guys, I guess. Depending on whether that is approved or rejected, it will either go back to the design stage if it's rejected, or moves on to the production file state, which has or does have a property of being published. And that means if you're securing and controlling your printing production, you can have certain users that can only print production-ready documents. So it prevents your print operators from printing labels that have not been authorized and gone through a managed document control process. Just come out of that. Now, of course, the workflow can be as simple or as complex as you wish. So let's select a more complex workflow for a regulated industry, and we can see that there are multiple steps that this particular document would need to go through before it gets into production. So multiple review stages can be set up. And that's entirely down to the user to define what their workflow would look like. Now, as a file is added to the document repository, we need to decide which workflow will be applied. So therefore, we have workflow rules. So if I edit one of these, we can see that when a document here is added to this folder of a particular file type or name, we can choose to run a particular workflow depending on what's been published, or perform other actions. So this will automatically run a workflow on a file depending on where that file has been saved and what that file is. So it automatically occurs. Now, if we decide to transition this to be approved and therefore ready for production, if I can spell, this document can now be used in software such as PrintStation, in Print Portal, the web printing application. It's used by default when automating the printing using the integration platform, for example. So production labels in a managed document environment is, generally speaking, what the print operators will be using. And of course, we can secure that down. We have security enabled under the administration console. Under user permissions, you would have like a print operators group, for example, and one of their permissions would be to print published documents, but not be able to print unpublished documents. So thereby securing your production.
Ian.
Yes.
Ian, yes, sorry, I don't like to interrupt this really interesting part of your presentation, but I'd like to remind you that in 15 minutes we should finish, and still we need to do the Q&A.
I see one there from someone asking, is it possible to print a continuous label with variable length for printing like a receipt
that's one
label, for example?
Interesting one.
The answer is we don't support that currently. If we go to the page setup of BarTender, for the page size, you'll notice that we can only define an explicit page height. There's not a variable page length option. Alas, that would require a new feature in BarTender. I believe it is something that we hope to support at some point in the future, but to be of variable length and therefore height of the label is not supported at the moment. Of course, templates allows you to have different template designs, but again, each of those templates are of the same height. So you can't have template which is 100 millimeters in length, template 2 which is 200, and template 3 which is 300. They all are of the same length. So alas, not yet supported.
Okay, Ian, there is another one. I'm trying to go in order that says, is there any way to use a weight scale to calculate a product price for a simple price label, and also to use it with a EN-JAN 13 code with the price or weight in that code?
You mean a GS1 barcode?
Well, if
Because
you can take a look.
the EAN 13 barcode just has the GTIN. So for example, if you have one of the more newer style of barcodes for retail, based on the GS1 standard, typically a data bar barcode, you'll see that it incorporates the GTIN. I think it's the best before date, and also a batch code. And this is very useful for retail customers who want more than just the identification of the individual product, but also that additional information that helps with product recalls and to turn over the stock from getting the older stuff to the front or the newer stuff at the back, or to remove the past its sell-by date items. Now, of course, one of those items could also include the weight of a product. So if you're using a data entry form with a weigh scale form control, we can capture the weight from the product. So let's say it's a piece of meat that you're putting on a weigh scale. We can capture that weight and incorporate that as one of the application identifier fields for that barcode. And this style of barcode, this symbology, is used in retail more. It's one of those ones that's used in some retail shops, but by no means not all. For example, here in Spain, Decathlon, which I think is a French company that sell sports equipment, they universally use the data bar symbology in just this fashion.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Ian. I hope it answered the question. I think this is a easy one. So someone is asking about serialization. Will this topic be covered in the next webinar?
The next webinar is on integration. So it'll be everything to do with integration, using the integration platform. Is there anything specifically about serialization that is wanting to be known?
Include that on the next.
I guess in terms of serialization, we can have a standard serial number, which is incrementing or decrementing in the way I've shown with the standard serialization feature. But also, if you have a document that is used, let's say in the medical device industry. So here I have a medical device example label format that I created before. As part of their requirement for medical devices, they need to uniquely identify that device. And one of the ways to do this is to have multiple data items, which also includes a serialized value. So let's take a look at, and in this occasion, it's all incorporated into this GS1 data matrix barcode. So this code as a whole represents the unique identification code. So this includes the GTIN, which identifies the actual retail product, a production date, which specifies a space in time when it was created, an expiration date, if it has a time when it expires, a particular batch that it was run in, a production run that it was manufactured in, and of course a serialized number, which within that production batch would uniquely identify that particular item. So when it comes to universal identification, these are often generated by concatenating these different fields together, where as a whole, they represent a highly unique value. So perhaps that is what is meant by serialization in that respect.
About that. Yeah, and I got another interesting one. Well, all of them are interesting, but I think this is related to something that many customers has been asking. So question is, can you set a name data source as also a global data field? I'm thinking specifically for the EU FIC sample template with the allergens and exceptions, etc.
So in terms of global items, we have our global serial number, if you remember. And this value is stored, let's make some space. This value is stored in the BarTender system database. Let's close that. So if we drag and drop this onto our label, this is used in this particular document, but it can also be used in other documents and between other users. We can, of course, create additional global data fields. I'll call this one test. But in terms of its value, it's essentially embedded data. So in respect to the question, it's probably not what is wanting. Can you remind me what the question was again?
Of course. So is can you set a name data source as also a global data?
This global data field, you can give it a name. glob_sn, for example. But that named data source is to the scope of this particular document. But as we've seen, a global data field is simply a name and a value. It's not as flexible as allowing for various types of data source, whether it's coming from embedded data, from a clock, from a database field, from a text file, or whatever else. So perhaps the answer is they'll need to, there's probably a different way of doing things that gets what they want, but it's not really answering directly their question.
Do that. There is another, well, there are many, still many, but I think we can cover only one more. And this one question about components. So the question is, if database source and components are installed in the administration console, all existing labels use the new data source?
Right. At the moment, components are coming from the file system. So for example, if I open up Windows Explorer and show it here, basically in Windows Explorer, I'm in my components folder, and basically you can see these are files and folders, and a component itself is a .btc file. It's like a mini fragment of a BarTender document. And when you create them, it's creating that BTC file. And when you use them, so let's go for a picture. When you use them, you're dragging and dropping and embedding that content into the document, so it's not linking. And I guess what they're wanting, or what they're asking for, is the ability to link components in much the same way as we can link database connections. And also something I didn't cover, we can link Visual Basic Script libraries. I think they're called libraries. So at the moment, components are embedded into the document. They're not linked. So I'm afraid the answer is, at the moment, you create a component, you drag and drop it into your label design, and at that point, it's much the same as when you just simply add content normally into. I think that answers the question.
Ian.
So it's on the wish list, and I for sure very much want that, because of course, if we could have a linked component, then yes, if you make a change and you have 100 labels, you would only need to edit the component, and those changes would be reflected in all of your document designs, making it much more easy to manage over time. But maybe BarTender 2022, who knows? I can dream. Do we have time for one more question, or are we done?
No, there is no time. It's 30 past 12, and you know, Ian, I'm Spanish, and in Spain we always follow the timing. You know that very well. So
you are very prompt, it has to be said.
So this is the end. For sure, we will answer all the questions afterwards, and you will receive it by email. Thank you, Ian. Thank you, everybody, for attending today, and looking forward for seeing all of you in 2 weeks' time. So, Ian, I guess you can say bye-bye.
Yes, thanks very much, everyone. I do apologize I wasn't able to cover all of the items that I wanted to, but hopefully what I went through today is going to give you a good jump start. So thanks very much. Thanks for joining.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.